My name is Arthur Vance. I'm an architect. For 42 years, I haven't just designed buildings, I've tried to give them souls. I built skyscrapers that scraped the clouds and museums that made people weep. But I never, in all my decades of shaping steel and stone, imagined that I would have to use my knowledge not to build, but to utterly and systematically destroy a man's life. Especially when that man was the son of my dearest friend, the protege who stole my life's work. He thought his triumph, a gleaming tower of glass and greed, was his masterpiece. He never knew that I was the true architect, and that I had built a secret, fatal flaw into its very heart. But to understand the precision of the revenge, you must first understand the depth of the betrayal. Let me take you back to a time that feels like another life, just 6 months ago. It was an autumn afternoon, the kind where the New York sky is a sharp, brilliant blue and the air smells of roasting chestnuts and approaching winter. I was in my office on the 54th floor of the Sterling and Vance building, a space I had occupied for 30 years. It wasn't a modern, minimalist box. It was a sanctuary. The walls were lined with dark oak shelves groaning under the weight of books on Palladian villas and Japanese joinery. The air was a complex perfume of old paper from my blueprints, the cedar of my drafting pencils, and the dark, rich coffee that was my constant companion. From my window, I could see 3 of my own buildings piercing the Manhattan skyline. They were like my children, each with its own story, its own personality. My firm, my life's work, was built with Gavin Sterling Sr. He wasn't just my business partner, he was the brother I never had. We met in college, 2 young idealists who believed architecture could change the world. He was the charismatic frontman, the dealmaker. I was the quiet engine room, the artist. We built our firm on a simple, unwavering principle, integrity. We used the best materials. We paid our workers fairly. We built things that were meant to last for centuries. We're not building assets, Arthur, he'd always say, his voice a low, reassuring rumble. We're building a legacy. Don't ever forget that. The first crack in that perfect world appeared not as a tremor, but as a quiet, sterile phone call. It was a Tuesday. Gavin Sr., my friend of 45 years, had suffered a massive, unexpected coronary. He was gone. The silence that followed the news was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The world tilted on its axis, and the soul of our firm was ripped out, leaving a cold, gaping void. The funeral was a blur of black suits and muted platitudes. The rain fell in a relentless, gray sheet, mirroring the hollowness I felt inside. The real tragedy, however, began the following Monday. Gavin Sterling Jr., who I'll call Junior, walked into the office. He hadn't just inherited his father's majority stake, he had inherited a kingdom he had no idea how to rule. Junior was everything his father was not. Where his father was warm and empathetic, Junior was cold and transactional. He was 38, with an MBA from Wharton and the predatory stillness of a shark. He wore suits that cost more than my car and a watch that was a constant, glittering reminder of his own importance. He saw our firm not as a legacy but as an underperforming asset. His first act as CEO was to call a firm-wide meeting in the main conference room. He stood before us, 100 architects, engineers, and designers, and delivered a speech filled with the soulless jargon of corporate raiders. He spoke of optimizing workflows, leveraging synergies, and monetizing our brand equity. He announced he was bringing in a team of consultants to trim the fat. As he spoke, I watched the faces of my colleagues. I saw confusion turn to fear on the face of Maria, our head of drafting, who had been with us for 35 years. I saw quiet fury in the eyes of Frank Miller, our veteran site foreman, a man who could spot a weak weld from 100 yards away. Junior's gaze then fell upon the centerpiece of our conference room, the large-scale model of our new flagship project, the Pinnacle Tower. It was to be my final masterpiece, the culmination of my life's work, a soaring, 90-story residential tower that twisted elegantly towards the sky. And this, Junior said, gesturing dismissively at the model, this prestige project. It's over budget and behind schedule. From now on, every decision on the Pinnacle will be run through me, and will be based on one metric and one metric only, ROI. It was in that meeting that I first met Maya Chen. She was brilliant, one of our best young digital architects, a master of the complex software we use to model our designs. She was ambitious and, at first, she was on his side. Maybe he's right, Arthur, she told me quietly afterwards, avoiding my eyes. Maybe we are a bit old-fashioned. The industry is changing. She represented the new world, a world that saw my meticulous hand-drafted plans as relics. The clash came to a head a week later. Junior called me into his new office, my old partner's office, now stripped of its warm wooden books, replaced with chrome, glass, and a giant abstract painting that looked like a crime scene. He had the plans for the pinnacle spread out on his desk. Arthur, he began, not bothering with pleasantries, I've had my team run the numbers. Your specifications for the curtain wall, the glass facade, are absurd. We're talking custom fabricated German glass. We can get a Chinese equivalent for 60% of the cost. Gavin, I said, trying to keep my voice even, that glass isn't just glass. It's a triple laminated, acoustically buffered panel designed to withstand hurricane-force winds and, more importantly, to completely eliminate wind noise for the residents, even on the highest floors. It's a key selling point. It's about quality. He laughed, a short, barking sound. Quality is a perception. And I can sell any perception I want. The Chinese glass is approved. The same goes for the steel. Your plans call for American-made, grade A steel. We're switching to a cheaper, imported Turkish alternative. It meets the minimum city code. That's all that matters. The minimum code is not our standard. I could feel the heat rising in my face. Your father would never. My father, he interrupted, his voice turning to ice, is dead. And his sentimental and profitable business model died with him. This is my firm now. You will sign off on these changes. No, I said, the word hanging in the air between us. I will not put my name, my professional license, on a building made with substandard materials. He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes cold and empty. Fine, he said softly. Then your name won't be on it at all. The public execution took place the next day. It was a board meeting, filled with the new, sharp-faced consultants Junior had brought in. He began the presentation on the pinnacle, but the designs he showed were mine, with my signature digitally scrubbed from the corner. He presented my work as if it were his own, a bold new vision he was bringing to the firm. When he got to the material specifications, he announced the cost-effective optimizations he had implemented. And then he turned to me. Arthur, of course, our esteemed founder, has raised some nostalgic concerns about these modernizations. But we have to look to the future, not the past. He made me sound like a doddering old fool, a relic standing in the way of progress. The new board members nodded sagely. They saw a young, dynamic CEO making tough decisions, not a son desecrating his father's legacy. I was voted down. Humiliated. A week later, I was formally removed from the project. 2 weeks after that, I was called back into the glass office. A woman from HR was there. Junior didn't even have the courage to do it himself. I was being offered an early retirement package. It was generous, they said. It felt like blood money. I was being erased from my own life's work. That was my all is lost moment. I went home to my quiet house, the house that suddenly felt cavernous and empty. 4 days, I did nothing. I sat in my study, staring at the framed photos on the wall, one of me and Gavin Sr. breaking ground on our first project, another of us winning the Pritzker Prize, the highest honor in architecture. My life's work, my friendships, my very identity, felt like it had been turned to ash. I was a ghost in my own past. The Pinnacle Tower, my tower, would rise into the sky as a monument to Gavin Jr.'s greed, a cheap, compromised version of my dream. It was during that dark, empty week that his words came back to me. A memory from a few months before Gavin Sr. died. We were having our usual late-night whiskey in his office, looking over the final drafts for the Pinnacle. He was quieter than usual, a sad, contemplative look in his eyes. "You know, Arthur," he'd said, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "A good architect always builds in a failsafe. A secret door. A hidden strength. Something only the builder knows is there, for a time when things go wrong." At the time, I thought he was being philosophical. Now, I wasn't so sure. The thought sparked a flicker of life in my deadened mind. I went down to my basement archives, a climate-controlled room filled with 40 years of my work. I pulled out my own original, hand-drafted blueprints for the pinnacle, the ones I had kept, the ones before they were digitized. I spent 2 days poring over them, my old skills coming back to me, the feel of the paper, the smell of the ink. And then I found it. It wasn't a structural flaw. I would never endanger lives. It was something far more subtle, more insidious. An architectural ghost. In my design for the grand, 3-story glass atrium that formed the building's entrance, I had used a very specific, complex geometric pattern for the mullions that held the massive glass panels. The design was beautiful, but it also served a hidden purpose. It was an acoustic diffuser, engineered to negate a specific harmonic resonance that I had calculated would occur when winds from the northeast hit the building at speeds over 40 miles per hour. It was a once-a-year weather event, maybe twice. With the expensive German glass I had specified, the effect would be negligible. But with cheaper, thinner, non-laminated glass? The atrium wouldn't break. It would scream. The resonance would amplify through the glass panels, creating a high-pitched, terrifying shriek that would be audible for blocks. It would render the multi-million-dollar lobby and the exclusive restaurant within it completely unusable. It was the perfect trap. A flaw that was not a matter of safety, but of pure, unadulterated humiliation. My father's failsafe. The first person I called was Maya. She came to my house that night, looking nervous. I could see the disillusionment in her eyes. She told me stories of further cost-cutting, of skilled workers being replaced by cheaper, non-union crews. She told me Frank Miller, the foreman, was on the verge of quitting. I laid out my old blueprints on my dining room table and explained everything. I showed her my acoustic calculations. I watched her trace the lines of my design, her technical mind absorbing the genius and the malice of it. A slow smile spread across her face. "He'll never see it coming," she whispered. "What do you need?" She became my unlikely ally, my agent inside the belly of the beast. Our revenge was a quiet, meticulous campaign. Maya, from her workstation, anonymously fed data to a highly respected, independent engineering blog. She didn't leak the secret of the acoustic flaw. Instead, she leaked the documents showing the switch from German to Chinese glass, from American to Turkish steel. The blog posts were cautious at first, then more critical, raising questions about the long-term viability of the Pinnacle's value-engineered facade. My part was to work with Frank, the Oracle. He'd call me from burner phones, telling me which inspection schedules were coming up. Using my knowledge of the building code, a code I had helped the city revise a decade earlier, I drafted anonymous letters to the Department of Buildings, pointing out specific, minor but annoying infractions I knew juniors knew, sloppy teen would be making. Nothing to stop the project, just enough to create a paper trail of non-compliance, to build a narrative of carelessness. The final piece of the puzzle was the weather. I became an obsessive meteorologist, tracking wind patterns. In late October, I saw it, a powerful nor'easter was forming, predicted to hit the city on the exact date of the Pinnacle's grand opening gala. The wind speeds were forecast to be a steady 45 to 50 miles per hour from the northeast. The trap was set. The night of the gala was a scene of opulent self-congratulation. The 3-story atrium was filled with the city's elite. Bankers, real estate moguls, politicians. Gavin Jr. was in his element, preening for the cameras, accepting accolades for his vision. I wasn't there. I was in my study, watching a live feed from a news channel's helicopter, a glass of my father's best single malt scotch in my hand. At 8:15 p.m., as the wind outside began to howl, it started. A low hum, barely perceptible at first. I saw it on the live feed, a few people in the crowd looking up, confused. Then the hum grew into a whine, then a high-pitched, piercing shriek. The sound of 1,000 nails on a celestial chalkboard. The massive glass panels of the atrium were vibrating, turning the entire lobby into a giant, deafening tuning fork. People covered their ears. Champagne glasses trembled on the tables. The beautiful, expensive evening dissolved into chaos and panic. On live television, the city watched as the triumphant grand opening of the city's newest landmark became a humiliating, screeching disaster. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The next morning, the headlines were brutal. The Screaming Tower, one called it. Gavin Sterling Jr.'s monument to greed falls flat, read another. The engineering blog I had leaked information to published a devastating analysis, connecting the acoustic nightmare directly to the well-documented switch to cheaper materials. The city's Department of Buildings, armed with my anonymous tips, launched a full-scale investigation, halting all further work and refusing to issue a certificate of occupancy. The investors, who had poured hundreds of millions into the project, panicked. They sued Gavin for fraud and misrepresentation. Within a month, he was forced out of the company his father had built. He was ruined, a laughingstock in the world he so desperately wanted to conquer. 2 months later, the board, in a desperate attempt to salvage the firm's reputation, asked me to come back. I agreed, but on my own terms. I came back not as an employee, but as the new CEO. My first act was to rehire every single skilled worker Junior had fired. My second was to appoint Maya as my head of design. My third was to call Frank Miller and tell him we were going to fix the Pinnacle, the right way, no matter the cost. It took a year and $60 million to replace the entire facade with the German glass I had originally specified. But we did it. Today, the Pinnacle Tower stands not as a monument to greed, but as a testament to integrity. It is silent, strong, and beautiful, just as my father and I had envisioned. Our firm, Sterling and Vance, is smaller now, more focused. We don't take on every project that comes our way. We choose the ones with soul. I don't know what happened to Gavin Jr. I heard he moved to Dubai, trying to start over. Sometimes, late at night, I stand in my old office, looking out at the city skyline, at the children I built. I think about legacy, and I realize it's not something you build for yourself. It's what you build for others, the standards you uphold when no one is watching, the secret fail-safes you put in place to protect what is good and true from the inevitable storms of greed. I didn't just get my revenge. I saved my father's soul.